I'm here with sculptor AndreTourette, and Andre has an interesting background to talk about as far as how he got into sculpting. He works with metal. How did this happen?
Well, I started welding. I was a welder on Navy ships. And then after I did that for 8 years, and then I moved to Florida. I'm originally from Brooklyn. I moved to Florida and worked on mega yachts, like 150-foot yachts that cost about $35 to $50 million. So everything on that yacht is a piece of art in itself. You know, we did all of the metal construction. So when I moved to St. Louis via a few other places, I lived in Europe for a while. I lived in Hawaii. I lived in Savannah, Georgia. I went back to Florida. When I moved to St. Louis, I went to work in a shop that we built primarily high-end stainless steel components for general contractors and architects. So it wasn't as creative, so to speak, as the motor yachts. And I've always been kind of handy in making furniture and things like that for myself. And in our shop, I have a lot of parts and pieces that are left over. So everything that I make is made out of leftover pieces. I kind of work backwards. Most sculptors envision something that they want to create and then get all the bits and pieces to make that. And I work backwards. I have parts and pieces that are left over from actual jobs. We're in a construction industry, and I take them and say, what cool thing can I make out of this?
And a perfect example is the I don't know if you call them the Q sculptures, but the sculptures that came out of. Can you explain how this happened?
That's these here. These this started out as a 4-foot by 10-foot sheet of steel, and there was a company that their little motto was a fancy letter Q, and they wanted us to cut them out of half-inch thick steel, and we powder coated them in a bronze color, and they hung them outside everybody's office in our office building. And what happens is we cut them with a water jet machine, and that shoots a stream of water out at about a gazillion miles an hour, and it can cut 9 to 11-inch thick steel. And what's left of the sheet of steel after we cut all the cues, it's all laid out by a computer. The computer does what's called nesting, and it puts as many cues as it can fit in the sheet of steel. And what's left over after we're done cutting the sheet is what's called a skeleton, and it would be your negative space, the space in between the cues, the leftover parts and pieces. So I just thought they were cool. You know, the rest of the guys in the shop wanted to send them to the scrap bin, and I said, no, they're too cool. We're going to do something with them. And I saved them for about 3 years, and I finally got around to doing it. And that's what these are, and we can try to put a couple of them together. And keep in mind that the nesting software makes the cues go in all different directions, so it's not a pattern that's repeated. But if you could see, I think it goes together about like, there we go. If you can see where my thumb is would be the beginning of the cue, and then where my pinky or my forefinger is, my pointer up here of my right hand, would have been the end of it. And you can see the space that's missing from there, the hole, is the cue, and that cue is hanging on somebody's wall right now. But I took the leftover stuff and cut them out and basically did nothing. I mean, they're like this to begin with, but they look really complicated. And then we painted them in mostly primary colors. There's a couple of them over here that are just red and yellow. But my wife is on like a Jackson Pollock trip now, and I wanted to do something a little different. And I told her, please do something with these two. And she did this red, white, and blue thing going on here and this little yellow guy.
And behind us against the wall, we have the shattered number 2. How did this one happen?
This was going to be an elevator panel. And if you've ever paid any attention inside an elevator, some of them are kind of boring and some of them are very pretty. And this is a double insulated piece of glass that has kind of this corrugated, fluted stuff inside of it. You could barely see that still through here. And this was an actual stainless steel panel, and this would hang in the elevator. So one of the guys in the shop was welding one of these together, and the glass shattered. And they were a little upset because they thought they broke the glass. And I said, you know, it had to have a hairline fracture to begin with. Don't worry, we have some extra. And they said, well, we could better put it in the dumpster before somebody hurts themselves. And I'm like, you guys nuts? It's beautiful. Why would you put that in the dumpster? They know I'm a little odd like that. So I put it into this frame. And as you said, this is number 2. I no longer have number one. It's part of a collection of a guy, a friend of mine, and I had some glass left over because the guy, he wasn't too smart. He kept ordering the wrong size glass, and he kind of skipped town without paying us for the job, and he was afraid to come back and get his glass. So I inherited all the glass, and I've made tables out of it and all kinds of different things, and I liked shattered number one so much, I broke this one. I put it up on a table and whacked it with a piece of steel, and it came out in a real nice pattern. So I put a real piece of glass over the front of it so nobody could, it's tempered and it doesn't fall apart, but still, if you ran your hand over it, you'd slice your hand up. So I put a real piece of glass over the front of it and put it right back in the elevator panel.
Well, this is interesting. We also have this blue piece behind us, and how do you get the color onto the metal?
That's aluminum. The base metal is aluminum, and I put the pattern into it with a grinder, a sanding machine, and then I paint over it with a translucent automotive paint, so you could see through the paint to the pattern.
So you're basically a very environmental artist. You take all these scraps, and it's smart because you don't have to pay for your materials.
That's right. I don't. Everything is leftover bits and pieces. The sculpture behind you here, the stainless steel one, we start out with 12-foot sheets, and we just have all these 4, 5, 6-inch strips left over. So I send them through the rolling machine and see what I can make out of them. It's all, everything in here is leftover bits and pieces.
Very cool. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you.